Thanks, Bill. That was very kind. I got to say, this is new for me. I'm not a liberal, and this constitutes the first time in my life, that would be 65 years, that I was ever invited to speak at a political party organized by another bunch of people, and I thank you for that. That's an honorable thing to do. That's cool. Like, maybe you're setting a trend, which would be good for all of us. So, I'm sorry that the gentleman from Ottawa isn't part of this, because I wanted to talk to Ottawa, so I'm going to have to count on you folks to tell them, okay? Okay. I met Justin Trudeau down at the Sasquatch celebration drinking Kootenay beer 10 years ago. And so if he ever gets to be Prime Minister, remind him that he's been here. He knows who we are. I wanted to talk about the Columbia River Treaty. Bill said I could talk about anything I wanted to, so long as it had to do with water, and the treaty is the timely thing that has to do with water that I would like to discuss. 1964, Lyndon Johnson and Lester Pearson signed a paper saying two countries would manage the Columbia between Canal Flats and Portland. It's a hugely important world. It is important to the world. Two countries trying to figure out how to manage a river without guns. That is not normal in the world, and it kind of has worked for 50 years. There's some stuff wrong with it, and in about, 40, 50, 60 days, we come to the 50-year mark of the treaty where either government, the United States or Canada, can reopen the treaty or renegotiate the treaty or roll it over or end it. That means that, and the discussions, the treaty is signed for 60 years. At 50 years, we're allowed to open negotiations leading to re-signing it in 60 years. That means that the federal election next will elect the government that will probably sign the treaty. So when you ask me to come talk about water, it seemed to me that that's the issue that ought to interest federal political parties, and I care what you do, what they do, what we do. In 1964, the two countries said that the only things allowed to be talked about inside the treaty were flood control and hydroelectric production. Anything else that might be on your mind, recreation or fish or water for irrigation or anything else that was on your mind, was not on the table, just flood control and hydroelectric power. I think that doesn't work anymore. I want to talk about it primarily in terms of irrigation. In 1964, essentially what has happened in terms of the treaty, the river used to run from the ice fields to the sea in springtime. Like snow melts, water goes to the ocean in springtime. We signed a treaty that said Canada would hold back 15.5 million acre feet of water to be called upon by another country when they needed it. That changed everything about eastern Washington, Oregon, Idaho, east of the Cascades. It made it possible to irrigate a desert in July and August with water which, if Canada hadn't held it, would have rushed to the sea in May and June and July. We weren't allowed to talk about irrigation, only hydroelectric power and flood control. But the water that we're holding has been used to make the desert to the south of us bloom with agricultural products which compete with our own that weren't there before. The net result has been Well, here's an example. Let's talk about tree fruits. In 1964, when we signed the treaty, Washington State had 141,000 acres of tree fruits, but by now they have 300,000. That's 100% increase with water from this river. In contrast, the BC fruit industry, when we signed the treaty, was 37,000 acres, and now it's 18, which is half. You got double to the south and half to the north. And it's not because of the intelligence of the farmers or the marketplace. It's the same kind of people selling into the same marketplace. It has to do with whether or not you can irrigate it essentially for nothing. It isn't just tree fruit. The total of irrigated land in Washington State when we signed the treaty was 1.1 million acres, and now it's 1.8, not quite double. I want to talk about potatoes so you don't think it's just tree fruits. When we signed the treaty, there was 36,000 acres of potatoes grown in Washington. Today, there's 160,000 acres. I was the Minister of Agriculture that watched the last potato chip plant leave British Columbia to go to eastern Idaho to use the potatoes that we're irrigating. In contrast, when we signed the treaty, British Columbia had 12,000 acres of potato production, and now we have 8. I would beg that you tell the people in Ottawa, British Columbia is not going to do it. We sell electric power. We only want to talk about electric power. I would ask Canada to put irrigation into the terms of the treaty, or else we won't do another 60 years. There are people who say, and I don't know if it's true, that if you know when you're in Washington, eastern Washington, you can sell your water rights. You own water rights there, you can sell it to your neighbor. It has a value, and the value, people say, is 16 times the value of water for hydroelectric production, which means we're getting paid this level, and people are using it at this level. I don't blame either government. I don't blame Canada. I don't blame the Socreds and BC for what they said in 1964, and I don't blame the Americans. It was a different time. But I would beg that we use this forum to say agriculture cannot go on giving away the resource that we compete with. Either we put irrigation into the terms of the treaty when we sign it next, or else then we have to go back to pre-free trade agreement deals, and we have to charge the Americans for dumping when their product crosses the border. Either one would be fine with me. Thanks a lot.